as we stay standing, hear the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please do take your seats. And if you're wondering why on earth God told the Israelites to pack everything in a rucksack, you can head through to St. Monica's as well. But here we're going to think about this reading from Luke's Gospel, which if you listen to it, might not sound anywhere near as attractive. One of the things we do at St. Bartholomew's is follow what's called a lectionary, which is a set of readings across a year. We're allowed to go off it at different points, but often it's the readings are sort of given to us by the Church of England. And to borrow a metaphor from the world of sport, it feels like this reading has a high degree of difficulty attached to it. Because it says to wealthy people, be on your guard. And we are wealthy people. We're a wealthy church in a wealthy area. But even as I say that, some of you may well be thinking, hang on, that doesn't describe me at all. And I don't know, it might well not describe you personally. So already I feel we're stepping into dangerous territory, talking about our wallets. But that is where Jesus goes in our reading. So in one sense, I'm grateful. I didn't pick this reading. It was given to us. And I suppose wherever we are personally with our wealth, whatever our bank account right now is showing, the fact is that living in the West, there is a very good chance that we are some of the wealthiest people the world has ever known. Just taking the long, long, long view there. And we as a church in the Diocese of Birmingham have some of the biggest reserves of any of the churches. And as we enter into our vacancy, it'll be one of the questions the PCC will be considering. What do we want to do with that money? How do we want to use it? Where is God calling us to use that money? But it feels strange, doesn't it? Particularly in a week like we've had, where we've been celebrating the arrival of the Commonwealth Games, the joy, the excitement, the celebration. And here is Jesus telling a story about someone who dies suddenly. It jars with the current sort of atmosphere in our city. Why does Jesus give us this parable? Why might we need to listen to this parable from Jesus today? Well, you might have noticed as it was read that the parable is set up for us in Luke by a question that someone comes to ask Jesus, and then that leads him into the parable itself. And the question, if you like, the setup, I think begins to answer that question, why we need to hear this. Because the question, and Jesus' interaction with the questioner at first, if you like, shines a light on what our problem is as human beings. It would be naive to think when you look around the world that everything is fine, that all with the human race is just great. One of the things that we see Jesus doing time and again is saying, look, here is the heart of the human problem. And in that first question and his initial response, we do, I think, get towards the heart of it. So verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." in a agrarian society like ancient Israel was, land ownership was one of the ways, maybe the only ways, in which you could gain wealth. And so it looks like this questioner is coming because, at least in his perception, there's some injustice going on. His brother hasn't divided the land fairly, and that's all he was going to have. So in one sense, it feels like a very valid concern, and a concern that if you've ever had to deal with a will or someone's inheritance, you might well know. It can be incredibly painful, dividing up an inheritance. It can cause deep division in families. And if you're the one who feels like you're being wronged, it's perfectly reasonable, we'd say, to want justice. You need someone who's going to execute the person's will fairly. So it's a totally valid concern, you think, except Jesus doesn't really want to play that game. Verse 14, Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" He says, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to engage with it, which is extraordinary if this is a fair concern. Why would Jesus not wade in? I mean, from the point of view of Luke, he is the appointed judge or arbiter. Luke stresses time and again that Jesus is the one sent from God who has, if you like, the crystal clear sight of all of our situations. He knows exactly what this man and his brother deserve, how the inheritance should go, and yet he doesn't go along and tell them about it. Why would Jesus not do that? Why would he leave them without that issue resolved? Well, I think it's because of what he sees is going on with this man coming to ask this question. And that's where the parable comes in. Because what the parable does, what Jesus does with this story he makes up about this rich landowner who wants to build more and more barns, the point of the story is wealth and pursuing wealth can do very, very, very bad things to you. It's interesting, in this story, Jesus talks about wealth all over the place. Money and issues around money are some of the most important things to him. And in lots of other places, I think you can draw the conclusion from what Jesus says, is he warns you about wealth because it doesn't, if you like, satisfy you. It doesn't bring you deep happiness. And that is almost a cliche today. I mean, you almost need, anywhere you look almost, people who've made lots of money, they will tell you, I thought it was going to be the answer to all my problems, and it wasn't. In the late 1990s, the writer Harriet Rubin in Fast Company magazine wrote this: "Of all the subjects we obsess about, success is the one we lie about the most. That success and its cousin money will make us secure, that success and its cousin power will make us important, that success and its cousin fame will make us happy. It's time to tell the truth. Why are our generation's smartest, most talented, most successful people flirting with disaster in record numbers? People are using all their means to get money, power, and glory, and then self-destructing. Maybe they didn't want it in the first place, or didn't like what they saw when they finally achieved it." She wrote that in 1998, and I think the past 20, 25 years bear that out. As people have got more and more money, it hasn't, in the West, solved all their problems. But it's interesting. That isn't quite where Jesus goes with this story. Because in this story that he makes up to make a point, the landowner is completely satisfied. He's delighted. As he hatches this plan, he's already got huge barns, he's already living a very comfortable life. He says, I can knock them down, build bigger ones. And then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. There's no hint in the story that he's achieved his goals and they have let him down. He's had moment after moment, day after day, year after year of just life going better and better. The problem is verse 20. God said to him, "You fool, This very night your life will be demanded from you. The problem is his mortality, and that he doesn't know when his life he will be called to account. And when that happens, whenever that will be, all of that wealth that he's accumulated won't do him any good. We might think, oh, hang on though, he could pass it on to his own children. If I have lots of wealth, I could pass on and set them up for a happy life. And I think Jesus would probably say, yes, you can. And it'll be the same issue for them. Our mortality, the fact that we are out of control about the most important thing about us, our very existence, is the issue that Jesus wants to press home on this man asking this question, I think by extension, us as well. And I think that the deeper point is this, that this man's wealth in this story has made him believe a story about his own life that is false. It's made him believe that he can determine the direction that his life's going to go. That he can shore up for himself and for those he loves all the security and contentment and happiness that he needs. And that is why wealth is so dangerous. Because he is believing lie after lie himself. He's, if you like, making the story up himself, and so he believes it automatically. No one's pushing it on him. And this is where I think it will hit home for all of us, whether or not we're aware of wealth as a particular issue. Because, if you like, any other God apart from Jesus Christ, any other ruler, influence in life apart from God in the end, will be pressing on you a false picture of reality, a false story for you to believe. And if you believe that, if you like, unchecked, without any restraint, if you just follow that story where it leads, you'll be in the same position as this man. And it's so striking in the story. Did you notice? He is just talking to himself over and over again. It's almost, I think it is supposed to be quite comical. Jesus tells a story about a man who tells a story about himself. And he's telling a story about what he's going to tell himself in the future when he gets there. A story about a story about a story. It's almost like the film Inception. Dream after dream, within each dream, completely lost in his own world. And in one moment in verse 20, God says that's not at all what reality is like. But that's why it's so dangerous. Because until God comes and says, you fool, he's completely blind to it. In his novel, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis pictures eternity apart from God in a way that I find the most compelling. When you start to think about eternity and words like heaven and hell, all kinds of strange and weird and unattractive pictures can come into your mind. C.S. Lewis, at one point, well, throughout that book actually, gives little pictures of what being apart from God forever might look like. And it's just along these very lines. One of the most striking. He imagines eternity apart from God, what the Bible would call hell, as like people living in enormous mansions by themselves, getting further and further and further away from each other. He pictures Napoleon Bonaparte, living in one of these. The man watching Napoleon says this, he was stood there, and then he was walking up and down all the time, left, right, never stopping for a moment. He never rested. And he was muttering to himself, it was Sue's fault, it was Nay's fault, it was Josephine's fault, it was the fault of the Russians, it was the fault of the English. Like that all the time. Never stopped for a moment. A little fat man, and he looked kind of tired, but he didn't seem able to stop it. You see the picture that Lewis is giving. If you turn away from God and worship something else, if something else becomes that dominant thing in your life, then the picture is not of being, I don't know, poked with pitchforks, or whatever image you might have, the popular image of eternity, of hell, whatever it is. It is of being so turned in on yourself that you're like living in a mansion all by yourself, and whatever it was that was controlling you in life controls you forever. For Napoleon in that picture, the leader being in control, feeling like everyone else has let me down, and he could never heal that wound. That's the problem that this man has. That's the problem of wealth. That if it's left unchecked, will do that to you. Will so turn you in on yourself that you're completely disconnected from reality. Which is why Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard. And that might feel almost like it's sort of too small a thing for Jesus to say. Because if it really is the case that there are things in our lives that are exerting this control over us that we can't even see, then saying watch out to us, well, we can't see it. Where's the problem? I have these, if you like, I'm wearing these lenses that filter out being able to see the problem I have. Which makes me think that those little words Jesus says there, watch out, be on your guard, are actually full of hope for us. Because whilst, if you like, the problem is deep, and without going into specifics for any one of us, the chances are that wealth will be in the mix, as well as all kinds of other controlling influences on our lives that are doing us harm. That isn't the only story you have to tell. That isn't the only thing you have to believe about yourself. Jesus himself offers a solution. And in fact, I think the solution, as I've been thinking about it this week, the solution is the best argument for coming here to church that I could think of. Because if our danger, if our problem is that we will, left to our own devices, get turned in on ourselves and believe all kinds of things that are simply not true, that are disconnected from reality, then what happens week by week when we gather and when we hear from this book and when we connect with God in our liturgy, in our worship, then by the grace of God, we connect with reality once again. When we sing songs about God being the one worthy of all glory, that isn't merely sort of like a sort of team talk to us. It is saying this is the truest thing in the whole of reality. And when we hear things and are invited even to, if you like, do things in terms of prayers that we say together, that we might at first glance not like the look of when we hear passages like this, which we find difficult because it, if you like, peers into our wallets, into our bank accounts and says, has this got a control of you? Well, at that point, we are being confronted with a reality beyond ourselves that, if you like, will wake us up to what is really going on in our own hearts, in our world all about us. And in fact, what we find in that sort of reality that comes to us from outside is a God of deep, self-giving love. And we're going to come and receive from him again at the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, in a few minutes. We meet a God here who gives to us in love, who gives himself to us like a bridegroom to a bride, who sends his Son into the world to deal with the darkness in our own hearts, and who week after week, day after day says, come and receive, eat and drink, feast in my presence. Reality is not gaining more for yourself, turning in on yourself. That's a distortion. Reality is giving. A God who gives to you in love, and who then says, whatever you're doing with your money right now, give some more away. Because that's what reality is. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, except to say this: give some more away. Find somewhere to give it to, so that maybe just a little bit more, you're on your guard against wealth turning you in on yourself. Let's be quiet and reflect on what this might mean in our own lives, our own hearts. And then Guy's going to come and lead us in our prayers of intercession.